I will tell you after you talk for 10 minutes. We're going to try to keep the talks to 15 minutes and
tough.
then questions. Yeah, I get you.
Well, I'll start. Okay, first of all, my name's Ron Good. I'm first generation West Virginia, born in the old KD hospital there in the Stoneman. So I do go back a little ways, not compared to my wife's family or let's see the Eversoles and the things, you know, I'm a new people to them, but I am first generation West Virginian. I love local history. I was in Air Guard 41 years, traveled the world, seen world history, came right back to West Virginia, right back to Hedgesville. Didn't see any place I wanted to live. So going forward from there, today I'm going to focus on the municipality of the town of Hedgesville. When it was formed, somewhat how it was formed, and some of the, not really arguments, but the newspaper article I'll read that in 1883. Politics is politics, even in 1883, okay? So I'm going to begin with Hedgesville was first incorporated in 1854. It was laid out in the 1830s. And I've never really found the gist of why it was incorporated in the first place. But when you look at the people, because part of the incorporation people went clear out to Butler's Chapel Road, on out to toward Butler's Chapel, out that way, signed a petition to get the state to get Hedgesville incorporated. So they brought a wide factor in initially in 1854 for signatures to do that. And some of those were influential people. M.S. Sabbert out there. The brick house is still standing. It's vacant, been vacant for a long time. The Sabbert house that they left. He was one of the ones, was a signer. They were money people. Money people lived pretty much east of Hedgesville, along the line down there, where the money came in and a lot of things happened. So, being that said, in 1854, what I've done over the years, I've got my granddaughter's Pokemon cards of this. Let's be part of her Pokemon. Gotta have something up to date as we do this. So anyway, with this here, this one, this book, evidently, there's a lot. I have a lot after West Virginia, but going from Virginia, the Civil War was devastating to our community. I'm not going to do that, but anyway, this is sketches of the acts and joint resolutions passed by the General Assembly of Virginia, 1857, 1858. So Hedgesville was incorporated in 1854. So what's going on here? So I don't know, but in here we go. An act to amend and reenact an act incorporating the town of Hedgesville in the county of Berkeley. The officers to be a mayor, 7 trustees, and a sergeant to hold their offices for 1 year or until successors are elected. That's the only. Evidently, there were some situations how the town to be run from 1854 to 1857. So this validated the town being back as a municipal government in 1857. Not really known to exist. You don't find anything. You find 1854 under Virginia. You don't find in 1857. This was done. I bought this at Israel Rinker was his book in 1855, where I think you'll find out he tied up with governments around here. I bought it at a state auction. So that brings us into the Civil War, devastating. Won't get into that Steve's thing. Town barely survived. I want to thank 2 families' descendants, Daniel Lefevre and Garrett Wynkoop. You said, what's his names for? Garrett Wynkoop was a merchant. He had established himself as a merchant in the 1850s for the town, along with some other merchants. But he developed, I guess, an economic income that he made money, so to speak. Not just come in and open a business, he made money. So, and you think Daniel Lefevre, everything around Lefevre is Bennington. We all know Bennington is Lefevreville. I mean, great family. But you live right there across from elementary school. But the old abandoned brick house sitting on the hill there, that was Daniel Lefevre's during the Civil War. Very money. He ran the mills. He had money. So they supplied the town. And with the town here, there are some things out there mentioned, like 1863 about Union come to town, they needed something to eat. They'd steal it. Confederates come to town, they needed everything. They'd steal it. Very hard for the town to exist supply-wise, because they come into town and take it. Okay? So moving to the government side of that, how we survived during the time, that minutes book, from 1854 up till this doing here, which how I recovered this one, was it was identified in 1938. Mabel Henshaw Gardner, Old Berkeley's Chronicles. They wrote that book in 1930, referenced the 1854 minutes book. They took some references out of it, so I know in 1938 that book existed. So I'm a bloodhound for this here. But some of Maple Henshaw Gardner's got shipped out to like Duke University. Some places got a lot of her stuff. I've never gone there to see if that journal was in there. The universities are starting to publish what they have on location. They would do it. Duke was a big one, got a lot of stuff from here. I don't know why that was, but a lot of our information from these people went to Duke University. So that being said, I'm looking to find that. So we come back to the 1870. Now this here was reincorporated. I'm not going to read all this. This pages is this here. Okay. Okay, let me read it. I'm going to read this verbatim. This is February 28, 1870. The charter of the town of Hedgesville will be amended and reenacted to read as follows. The corporate town limits of Hedgesville shall be as follows. I'm not going to get into all that, but anyway, the municipal authorities of the said town will be a mayor, 5 councilmen, a sergeant, a recorder, a treasurer, and a superintendent of roads, streets, and alleys, all of whom shall be elected annually by the citizens of said corporation, who may be entitled under the act to vote, except the recorder and treasurer, who shall be appointed by the council from among others own number, and all of whom together shall constitute a common council. So anyway, the bond of the sergeant and the treasurer shall be each in such a penalty that not less than $300 as the council may prescribe. So I won't get into all the details, but that was reincorporated under the state of West Virginia. So that's all nice and dandy. So I'm gonna bounce around just a tick. 1870. So we're under West Virginia. So always wondered, where's the minutes book? 1870. So I'm a bloodhound. Well, I got wind of it. I saw it in the 90s. It was in private hands. Wouldn't return it. So when that estate came up for liquidation, I requested our minutes book, and they gave it to me. I'm getting tears. Finally rescued this book that's been going so long. And the primary reason was, to hold that thing in your hand, now that the town owns it, because I was town councilman and everything like that. I brought it out. This has never been seen before. Bring it out and share it. It's going back over and lock it right back up here. We have some fireproof safe boxes over there. It's going right back in there right after this. But to find it, and there it is. There's a lot of history in this thing. Tells you in the beginning how we struggled and all like that after the Civil War. How did we rebuild? The Reconstruction area after the Civil War from 65 up to about 73 has been a tough time in the South in this area rebuilding. So what happened? I have no idea. There's not one mention about the Civil War in this book. This like, forget it, we're moving on. You know what I'm saying, dude? Now, you think, due to the fact that this year would be something mentioned on the Civil War, I've searched that thing pretty hard, and it's not. It's more like they just didn't do it. I'm thinking, why wouldn't he? I thought, why would he make it? Civil War's over rebuilding, but every day, sometime from 65 to 70 is where it was at. We may have been in limbo. I don't even know if we had a governing body then. But I do know in 1870 we was reestablished. I want to go through a couple things here on that. Some of this book you can see it's somewhat faded, depends on the quality of ink. So bear with me. I read pretty good old script. I'll see here, this is the books received of the Corporation of Hedgesville, Berkeley County, West Virginia. Right there. So that's the baby right here. So we're going to move it on over here. I got to get focused here. Passed by the legislature of West Virginia the first day of March 1870, incorporating the town of Hedgesville. An election, anyway, it talks about how this is done here, and Richard Bodine signed that. He was the one. It's hard. I get tears in my eyes from the book. I'm still sentimental about it. But anyway, there's where it's at. Richard Bodine of Hedgesville Township, Berkeley County. So Richard Bodine Street down here, had a tavern. You'll see here, they didn't grant his license later on. But anyway, we'll let that feud go on a little bit later. But the idea, there's where it was on here. And then the Hedgesville, Berkeley County certified the election was held in the aforesaid corporation the 5th day of April, 1872. Now we're up to 1872 now. So it was 1870 was granted reincorporation. Now we're 1872 getting it off the ground. Like it took a little time. And the following personnel was duly and lawfully elected to fill the following offices. For council was G. Wynkoop, Garrett Wynkoop. There's that Wynkoop I talked about, had helped save the town, keep people fed. George H. Rock. Their initials, but I know them. I know these people. George Rock. You deal with George Rock, Little Georgetown. Rock is down the Rocks, all that deal with Little Georgetown. But he was in Hedgesville at that time, okay? H. Hall, there's a lot of halls. I have to let that one go. I don't know which one hall was it. The Hall family lived in the greenhouse coming into town there. When you first come in up from 7-Eleven, that greenhouse there, the little rock, that was the Hall homestead right there. And W.H. Rickard. Rickard was an old, they lived right there right on Main Street there, where the Rickards lived, okay, for a long time. That was, they were a council, and then N.L. Lincolnfelter. Lincolnfelter they ran stores. A lot of these people ran stores in the town. I have receipts and stuff in the 1880s from all this here. So they did that. Then for sergeant was Jacob Naylor. Jacob Naylor, I consider the town hero. Naylor Hall, Jacob Naylor moved in here, blacksmith, stuff like that on that there. But when that wasn't him, but his descendants in 1955 gave Naylor Hall to the town. And that's what I'm getting to. That's why this stuff got so dispersed out. Before 1955, down recorder, you keep it in your house. You had no positive place to put it. If you were electric recorder, you take all the town stuff to your house. Or down here, sometimes they rented a lot. We had several nice lodges, the Oddfellows Hall and the Masonic Hall. Sometimes they pay a quarter to rent the hall, something like that during time. About 10 minutes ago, I find it Okay, here we go. That was something. Anyway, Jacob Naylor enabled us for $10. He gave it to the town. Bought it, donated that. He put in the old church, which is north. During the Civil War, they split. Rip Schwartz, they all went to that church early. Then during the Civil War in 1863, they split. Had Southern Methodist, Northern Methodist. That's how intense this town got. But you had a lot of Southern soldiers on that side of town. I guess that's why they would do it. Over here, that's probably where the Miller, I don't know where it all come in, but there's a lot of animosity. Let's face it, friends for once, and all of a sudden, you're not friends. I couldn't even imagine that. But anyway, it did. But Hedgesville made it through. You'll see read later on here how they reconnected. Just kind of let that go. Just let it go. We're back as one person, one town. Let's keep it going, okay? On that there. So then for streets, Jacob Miller, and for surveyor, streets and alleys, Lemuel S. Howard. Don't know him well. I know he was here by 1890, so he was gone. He was just here at that time. Wherever he is, there was some stuff with him on here in the town. And we had some transition. There's some heavy German names in here also a little bit later on that they left. It was gone. I don't know where they went, but that's where that was at. So that's 10 minutes. Let me. Okay, I was going to go to. I use my granddaughter's Pokemon cards. You can see that here. Let me see what I wrote here. All right. Okay, I'll hold it there because that's going to. But what I want to do, since my time is running out, here is a list of people, and I like remembering the dead. I call them the dead because we all going to die. I like giving them the respect. These are the people, and I'm gonna read them. It's a little long, but bear with me. I got most of. I know these people, so we'll just start. Okay. All right. Here we go. Alphabet list of taxpayers for the Corporation of Hedgesville. These are people. This is probably, I would say, the paper 1880, somewhere in 1870. It's similar to paper in there, but it was torn out. Whatever. But anyway, I want to read their names and respect for those names. George Pell, built a home. Real fancy house right beside. There used to be the post office there in town. That was a Pell. Oh, I got to quit that. Okay. Alexander Arnett, Josiah Alexander, John Abey, George Blake, E.P. Bell, ran a store. I'm sorry, I keep going. Dr. Butler, was right where this parking lot is, where Dr. Butler lives, okay? David Brown, C.E. Brown, that's Brown's Funeral Home in town, started one house above that. That was Brown's Funeral Home. Still is, that's what's left of it. We're guys trying to get it to restore it. Not easy. Okay. J.T. Bodine, there we go, back to the Bodine family on there. Edward Bodine, there we go. William Bodine. C.M. Brown, there we go. Charles M. Brown, their ancestor down in Martinsburg. I don't think any Browns are in there, but the Brown's funeral was in there. Mrs. A. Catherine Brown, Edgar Byers, John Chambers, Edward Clayball, John Clayball, Jacob Chapman. Hollis. This is really strung out hard on me. I'm gonna have to draw. John. Reverend Dorsey. John Ellis. Ellis family. George Falkwell. Howard Ginn. Ginn family. Did a lot of work in this now. A lot high grade. So J.D. Ginn, G-U-I-N-N, I spelled. M.J. Graybills. Graybills was here. Dr. Graybill. He's a S.A. Graybill. I don't want to have to use abbreviation, but you used to call it S.A. That's what that stands for. Graybill. And Frank Graybill. Graybills were prominent at one time. They moved on that toward Cannon Hill a little bit more when it's all gone now. The Geyer, B.H. Geyer, J.M. Harrison, E.B. Hall, C.S. Harrison, Nanny Harrison, Henshaw, Mrs. Henshaw, Henry Holly. Now we're talking African Americans. Hedgesville had quite a population of African Americans during this time frame. Henry Holly, Mrs. J.T. Harris, Catherine Hall, E.C. Henshaw. There's the Henshaw family was in here, and her descendants was a teacher at the elementary school back in the day. Dr. G.H. Hanna, he was here. Jacob Hall, Dallas Hall, John Hall, June Hall, Mr. Jacob Harris, Mrs. Harriet, that's a German name, George C. Harris, Paul and Hannah, George Hayes, he said it's Collard, R.A. Jakes, had a funeral home right down the street here, the house is still there. George T. Craiglow had the big house on the elementary school before you put the development. If you live here long, had that old home set up there. Elementary school sets here up on the hill was George T. Craiglo's house, but he had a store down. And M.A. Craiglow. I'm sorry, bear with me. I just got to do this. E.R. Layburn. I know Layburns. L.W. Lincoln Felcher. Jacob Lucas. Mrs. Mitchell. George Means. George Means is a relatively short period of time. He ran a fertilizer place in town. He had it called on fire. Man, I tell you what, it lit that side of town up. It's lucky it didn't burn the whole town down. But he had, because I got some papers from him. George Means sold fertilizer. I'm sorry. John Mullins, William Mason, Jacob Naylor again, M.C. Nadenbush, Confederate Colonel, Moses Collin Nadenbush, on that. Robert Nadenbush. And here's Mrs. T. Neon, N-I-H-I-O-N. I don't know how you say that, but they were here not long. Addison Osborne, Stephen Orball, Poisel, Robert Pearl. So Pearls were here. Susan Pearl, Susan, the guardian for Susan Pearl. On that, John Redmond, Edward Rickard, Rob Rickard, Frank Rickard, Rachel Robinson, Martha Runk, the Runk sisters. That's a whole story itself. Lovely. They run the telephone business in town. They knew everybody's business. They had the house up there. They run the switchboard. I love them. Mrs. Wilbur Rickard, James Slaughter, J.T. Slaughter, Schaefer, Morgan Schaefer, William Schaefer, Mr. Shackelford, H. Small, another Small, Adam Small, Thomas Smith, Champ, Shepard, George T. Slaughter, you had that, he ran the store, J.W. Snyder, B.D. Snyder. B.D. Snyder also ran the Hedgesville, had a newspaper in Hedgesville for a little while. On that, he was kind of the go-to guy for everything. Edward Turner, Samuel Tyler, S.J. Vermillier, or it should be J.S. Vermillier, they reversed it. Walter Vermillier, Wood, William Wood, Dr. Ward. Dr. E.A. Ward was a doctor. At one time, had quite a few doctors in it. See 3 or 4 in the town here on that. L.L. Winham, that's my wife's family's part. Joe West, back to the college. The West you have down there. Wade West. There's James West. There we are. He paid total 60 cents in this time for cheese packages. Ashley West, Garrett Underdonk, Fanny Weaver, and last night was they put it in there because I laid one on that there. So thank y'all. I hope I did work. This is respect. These people pay taxes anywhere from a nickel, 3 cents to $1. This funded the town. And at that point, I'm not going to cover any more, but that's where we're at. Thank you for letting me represent these people here. They mean a lot. Okay? Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, here. Watch your step. I got some spaghetti going.
Okay, good morning. I will introduce myself. She already did a good job with that. Before I get started, I want to recognize a person, of course, no longer with us, John Eckerd. It taught me a lot about Hedgesville. I used to get with him on Sundays and ride around and listen to his stories. And of course, Bill Moore, who's very ill now. I mean, Bill has given a lot of attention to Hedgesville over the years, trying to promote it, and has good research material for any time, any books you'd want to read. Well, what we're going to talk about this for 10 minutes is the first man from Hedgesville to go to Japan. His name's George W. Miller. This may be him. Ronnie thinks it is. He got the picture for his own collection out of the Cecil Miller's estate, and we believe it's probably George Miller. And who was he? Well, he was just a young man who lived in Hedgesville, and evidently he was at the Harper's Ferry raid by John Brown. And when he was there, he was very impressed by the Marines. As the Marines charged in, Jeb Stewart was with them, but he wasn't a Marine. He just went to the door, knocked on the door, and said, and identified John Brown. He knew him from Kansas. But the Marines went in, of course, and it was all over in a few minutes. But George Miller must have been there with probably some other boys from Hedgesville. I'm pretty sure by that time he was with the Hedgesville Blues as a militia company. And so right around Christmas on December 20th, he's going to write this letter to Robert E. Lee, because Robert E. Lee, he thought, being a commander at Harper's Ferry, was in the Marines, but he wasn't. He was in the Army. But Lee gets this letter, and probably just as fast as you get letters today, he wrote it on the 21st, and Lee replies to the Marine Commandant a few days later. It said, having a desire to join the service, Miller wrote, I concluded that I would address you on the subject, as I am young and hearty. I would like to join the Marines at Washington. If you will write me and let me know the terms, there will be several come with me. I am 20 years old. Please write soon and I will come. So he says he's going to bring some boys from Hedgesville with him. Now, how I came across this story was in 2020, I was talking to Tom Dunn, who lives in Back Creek Valley, and he was a Marine, and he does a lot on Marine history, and he came to me one day and he said, there's a story about 4 Marines from Hedgesville who at the beginning of the Civil War get kicked out. And I looked at him, I said, the names, I said, I don't know these other names, but George Miller was from Hedgesville because he's in this book by Maynard, the Maynard Diary, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So I started investigating, but here on Christmas Eve, Robert E. Lee writes the commander of the Marines, and he's talking about you must not be you must not be surprised by the Virginia boys that now want to join the Marines because of the John Brown fight. As one evidence, this is Robert E. Lee writing, I includes you the petition of a young and hearty young man whose military enthusiasm must make amends for his orthography, meaning I guess his writing was not too great. So evidently that colonel contacted Miller and by January the 12th, he was at the Washington barracks and joining up. It doesn't say anything about him taking anyone with him, but there's also a man named George Fox who appears, and he might be from Hampshire County. We're pretty sure he's from Hampshire, Hardy County, so he may have been in Hedgesville. So January 12th, he joins the Marines. A few months later, when he joins the Marines in Washington Barracks, he is under the command of Captain Israel Green, the man who, of course, went through the doors there at Harvest Ferry and ran his sword into John Brown's belt buckle. It broke, and then he beat him over the head until unconsciousness. But he's with a group of 50 Marines who's sent to Brooklyn Barracks, and on June the 30th, 1860, he's going to go a long trip on the ship Niagara. What is this trip about? Of course, you know Japan was a closed society for hundreds of years. And the United States in the middle 1850s started opening it up. They had sent ambassadors to D.C. to sign a treaty. Some ambassadors and about 70 men, their attendants. These men then were going back to Japan. So George Miller, through this letter, he's going to get a free trip to Japan. It's going to go on for 10 months. And, probably pretty seasick when he got out there. But it's on the ship Niagara. Now they take off. They stop at a lot of different ports. They stop in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Luanda, and Angola, Cape Town, South Africa, and on around in Indonesia, Jakarta, Indonesia. Name escapes me, had a different name then. And finally, they reach Japan, visit there a few days, and then return home. When they are in the Middle East, they stop at a port called Aden, and when they get the first news that something's going on back home. Okay, so they know something's up, but they don't have very good information on it. They continue on as they go through the channel between Africa and Madagascar, big storms and things like that. So they finally pull into the Cape of Good Hope, and they're going to stay in South Africa for 10 days as the ship's repaired, and they get their legs back and so on. They were through a big storm. So they get news then that there's a definite break in the United States. Something's going on bad. They really don't know there's at war yet. So, continuing on, they get back to Boston. They arrive in Boston on April the 21st. According to the Philadelphia Ledger, her officers, having not heard from the United States since they left in June 1860, were almost paralyzed by an announcement made to them by the pilot, who they picked up at sea, that the nation was under arms and preparing for war. As soon as they get into the port of Boston, the Southern officers leave. Israel Green was from the north, but his wife was from Berryville. And he decides to stay with the South, and he'll be connected with the Confederate Marine Corps. Miller and the others will continue on after the ship is repaired to New York. And at New York, 4 of them are disgracefully discharged. And somehow they have all 4 as being from Hedgesville. But we think two of them were from Loudoun County. Maybe they were in Hedgesville sometime. They all decided to go with George Miller. So they're disgracefully discharged. And Miller's going to come back, and he's going to get back with the Hedgesville Blues. But now the Hedgesville Blues are not militia, but they're in the regular Confederate Army. So they're in the 2nd Virginia Infantry, Company E. He's probably at the Battle of Falling Waters, because that's on July the 2nd, 1861. And then the big battle at Manassas, First Bull Run, is going to occur on June the 21st, 1861. So 3 weeks after the Battle of Falling Waters. What happens there? Well, the writer of this diary, Elisha Maynard, he ran a mill. He was 20 years old. He ran a mill back at Johnsontown, and he more or less was exempt. He didn't really, you weren't in, there was no draft then, but you didn't have to go. He might have been in the Blues, but he didn't have to go. His brother David is killed at the battle. His brother Charlie is wounded. And he gets the message that George Miller, here's what he writes about him. He doesn't find out the 28th, the week after. George Miller is badly wounded and is thought he will not get well. So he's shot in the neck in this first battle. Says suffered a severe neck wound. Now, Maynard's father will get in a buckboard and he'll go to get Charlie. And Charlie's right around Manassas there somewhere, maybe Centerville, in a hospital. And George Miller there's too. And what he says here about, they arrived at Hedgesville yesterday. This is on August the 31st. George did not appear to be much fatigued by the journey. So he's seriously wounded in the neck, and he rides, what's that, 110 miles, 120 miles in a buckboard up this way. So they're optimistic that he's going to recover, but he's going to linger a long time before he dies. On February the 5th, here's what Maynard writes. George Miller, who is wounded at Manassas, is very ill. Okay, he's in at Norborne Parish. They had a hospital there, and he's very ill. And so this is 7 months later. It says on February the 11th, okay, who was wounded, what? 5 days later, Miller died. Now, here's what he writes. On February the 11th, there's going to be a big funeral here in Hedgesville. And Maynard says it was full military honors. Now, you can walk right down over the hill. Curtis may have a picture of it. It's just a small stone, but no one else is around. No one else is buried in the plot. And that's the mystery. I'm pretty sure somewhere in that Cecil Miller line back, but we're not sure if this is a picture or who he was related to in Hedgesville. But that's the story of the first Hedgesville person to go to Japan and what happened to him.
So,
Oh, you can come out this way, Steve. All right, so the next person that's presenting will be Curtis Hite, and he's got some information. Can we leave this one up? Okay. And then you can click over to what you need to click over to.
My name's Curtis Hite. I'm from Hedgesville. My ancestors are all buried here in the cemetery, back 6 generations. So, I'm about the 6th one. So, I'm glad that Steve and Ronnie brought some names up to you, because they're all right here in the cemetery. Every one of them. Everyone on that list is pretty well in the cemetery. Now, a few of them might have went to other towns where they grew up at the time. But a little history about the church, Episcopal Church, because that's where it all started at. From the French Revolutionary, from the French and Indian War, they had a survey that came out in 1752, and Hedgesville was plotted all this area. And Lord Fairfax granted the grant for the town to be laid out, but had to find a person to do that. So Josiah Hedges and a few others laid out the town as you see it right here. But the Episcopal Church had the cemetery at first, right here, number 5. And it was, at one time, So my records have said that they had a fort called Hedges Fort was on this same property at one time. So it must have burned or whatever during the wars and all that. But we won't get into that because it was like Ronnie said, the wars, since it was Virginia at the time, going into West Virginia. Some of the people probably, I'm thinking, is for the South, for the North, whatever. You know, they just didn't want to think about it. So in 1806, John Burns was selling a plot of land, 217 acres, which is currently located. 2.5 of these acres, right here, was for a meeting house. And in 1818, Mount Zion Church was rebuilt for a red brick church and was finished in 1819. So when George Washington come through, he wasn't president at the time, but he would come through Hedgesville. He was a surveyor at the time too, in the whole area. So he surveyed and did a lot of other things, but he wanted to stop to the Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Church, to worship. And from there he went to the tavern, stayed overnight, went to Berkeley Springs. I think we all know that story pretty well. But the church wanted to have a cemetery, so they had a cemetery in the back part here. Okay. And then I don't know what happened later on in the 1900s. Cemetery got bigger, of course. The Beavers down here at the bottom sold some land here in the 1900s, tract of land for the cemetery for burial rights. So then, in 1911, 12, when the railroad was going through, they had an epidemic in Hedgesville. I'm not sure what it was, if it was malaria, typhoid, they had Rocky Mountain fever, but a lot of the workers on the railroad had come down ill and actually died, like a couple hundred of them. So they have a massive grave site that's right in here. There's a few stones down here, some Thomas's, but from here this way, north to south, 3 rows, massive graves from the railroad, or people working on the railroad, or people that just didn't have families that just put them all in a row right there. I'm glad that Steve brought up George Miller because he is right. This is the church. As the addition comes out, George Miller is right in here, this area. Come down here, the Hedges is all right here in a row. Josiah, Susan, then Mr. Miller's way out here in the open. There's nothing around him. And then on over further, then you have the John T. Hedges, Owen Hedges, and so forth. They're the tallest monuments in the cemetery. They do have script on the stone that says Berkeley County, Virginia on there. They passed away in Gettysburg at the time of the war, Civil War, and laid the rest there in Hedgesville Cemetery too. So the circle here was laid off in 1896 by J. Baker Kerfoot. He laid that circle off and had everything's in a like pie shape. And if you look at the circle, and if you look at, if we could go to Google Map, if you want to, see if you get on Google Map, Hedgesville Cemetery, and you'll see a lot of these stones right there too. But it's laid off in a wagon wheel, and it has spokes through it. Back here with this dot to that.
Okay.
Right
All right.
and they're right there.
Can I go in closer?
Yeah. A little closer. Just move your, yeah, right there.
That's as far down as it's letting me go on Google Maps.
The one down here, the layers.
Oh,
Layers
smart
here.
you.
Layers here. So this is the circle. And you can make it smaller if you want. There you go. There you go. If you want to see George Miller's tombstone,
Have this if you
right
want.
about this area. Right in there, pretty close. Pretty close to that. It makes small. Yeah, there you go. There you go. You come down the road. Right here is the hedges all through here. There's one little stone way over here, but you can't see it from Google Map much. It's right there where George Miller's at. And then, so this was all laid off by Mr. Baker back in the 1890s. And there's some more Millers up in here. This hedge row here was his some of his family. So there's a stone here and a stone here. Well, the story about that is Mr. Crowd was telling me about these people here, his relatives were over there too. They got mad at each other and put the hedge row up there, so they didn't want to see each other. Yeah, really. Okay, make it smaller. Little small, little small, little small, little small. We're going down here, massive graves right here. Okay, right. So the cemetery comes all the way down here. Right here where no stones at all. From here all the way down, back and forth. There's massive graves for the railroad. I don't know how many's in there. I have researched our minutes back in the 1930s. Mr. Crow was the caretaker at the moment. At that time, he had loads of dirt comes in here and just kind of leveled it off because it all settled. There's no caskets, no bolts. Back in, they didn't have the bolts, concrete bolts or anything. You just put them in cedar boxes a lot of times. So that's the history of that. Okay, let me get through my notes here. Okay, we was kind of wondering as a cemetery committee when this road was put in, and it was in the 1930s, but it was all gravel at the time. We kind of wanted to know what the asphalt was. So they tore and chipped it in 1955, and Ramona Hess was the head. It was into the cemetery at that moment, and somehow the church here let the cemetery go from this part on. In the 1920s and 30s, it just left it. Just didn't want to take care of it anymore. So townspeople in Hedgesville, like Ramona Hess, Mr. Crow, Vermilias, Robbins, Lincoln Felters, they all got together and formed a committee in 1881 to incorporate the cemetery as a community cemetery, because they had multiple churches around and most of them didn't have cemeteries, so they thought, well, have all the townspeople in one area would be nice, you know. So that's why it was incorporated in 1881. And some of the Kilmers, Robbins, Millions, all of them was on the committee at the time too. So they had some quarrels in between. So they had one quarrel with these concrete borders being put in. They thought that looked kind of hideous, but as you see, it's like a wagon wheel right here, with this being the hub, and this is the center axle coming out. So it's kind of neat that they thought, you know, how to do that back in the 1890s. You know, without even seeing a map, they just drew it out, basically. So, there you go. And so when you come in here and come around, this was all Mr. Brown's area. Artie Brown and his dad owned all this up to the middle school, and still does the middle school portion. 1922, this is kind of running out of spaces here, so Artie Brown laid this off in 1922. So each plot is 18 foot by 18 foot square here. So you can get 12, or 6 at the top, 6 at the bottom, vaults and so forth. So that leads us up to 1922. And some of the burials back then was done by individuals of the cemetery committee itself. They just hired a person, say, here, you dig the grave. They all dug them all, these all by hand right here, from here down. These here were mechanically dug now by Mr. Walls. But before then, it was Mr. Jacobs of Hedgesville. He charged by the hour, whatever. So, in 1968, they decided they wanted to put asphalt across here and around, come up and back. And they had the Lewis brothers out of Shepherdstown, West Virginia, come up and laid that blacktop for $900 back then. That was 1968. That was a good bit of money back then. You know, it's like now we're wanting to resurface that, and we've got estimates clear up to 30,000, but we're not going with that one. That's pretty high. The lowest one was 6,000. So kind of going to go in the middle and hopefully get that done next year. It's getting pretty broke up. From that time to this time, it's well over 67 years old, so it needs to be resurfaced. So in 2004, when I hate to say Mrs. Landis and these boys, they passed away, and their estate came about, and they lived right up in this house right here, Landis' house. We call it the White House in Hedgesville. We call it, you know, the White House of D.C., but we've got a White House here in Hedgesville, West Virginia. And that's two ladies there that school teachers, principals, whatever. When they passed away, they wanted to leave this. There used to be a barn right here. It was kind of unsafe at the time for the cemetery committee to obtain it, to maintain it, and to keep it going. So they just kind of had to take it down. Really didn't want to, but pretty well had to. And they wanted to leave this property with the barn and everything for burial purposes only. So in 2004, that was gave to the cemetery, platted out, and recorded in the Brooklyn County courts for burial purposes only. And the committee decided to just kind of keep all flat stones up through there. This is a memorial in honor of them, giving that to the cemetery itself in 2004. So, yeah, a lot of history in there. A lot of you have the Bodines down in here. You have snodgrasses in this area. Runners are in this area. I'm not sure why there's so many blank spaces there. Back then, I guess they just said we want to be buried here, and that was their row, so on and so forth. But there's a lot of blank spaces in there. We kind of don't want to do any digging in there because we really don't know without looking at the ground, having geologists come in to tell us what's there underneath before we did any digging. Last time we did any digging in the old park was down in this area right here, right close to here. The stone right there. We did that one because the will stated that she wanted to be next to her grandfather, and grandfather's right here. So we dug that like that. Came real close to cedar vaults, cedar caskets, still intact over 100 years, still intact. We dug real slow. I was there with Mr. Walls. We dug it real slow, and it just kind of caved in a little bit, enough to put the vault in there, cedar vault there, one down to the bottom, enough space to put the other one down beside of all of them. And he was amazed to see that that was still intact. After all the years he's been, not doing any more digging in there. It's just too dangerous. Don't want to disturb anything at all. So that's basically the history of Hedgesville Cemetery.
Well, thank you.
If you want to find the grave, we can go do that. It'll be our last thing. And I just jot some names down. If you all want to just put that in, you can put John T. Hedges. T for the middle name. Hedges right there. And just search this cemetery. It should come up. Just move up.
Oh, I must have typed it. John.
Yeah. T.
Hedges.
Right. Okay. If it doesn't come up.
No answers.
Okay.
Take the T out.
Okay.
Yep.
Take the T
Yeah.
out.
Okay. You do that. Just put John Hedges in there.
Okay. Wonder if maybe I need to put a cap. I don't know how. Yeah, there we go. I still don't see it.
See, okay, we'll do another one. With, Paul Hite. That's my dad. I'm pretty sure I know that. Should be there. Better be
Oh,
there.
better be there.
Well, unless something's up with the whole thing. Okay. You just click on that. And it says no grave at that time. You might have not had it updated right then. Let's try, John Bodine. That should be up there. I don't know if I can see the grave itself.
You could have gotten a better typer for this.
Okay. That's okay. Let's see, yeah. Right there it is. That's his stone right there. It's John T. Bodine. He's in the circle. I can flip back to the circle and I'll show you about where it's at. Okay. Right in here. Right there. That's his gravestone right there. So he's on the inner circle.
Does it tell you the location of his grave?
Nah, that's one thing they didn't do because we really don't have any locations. I mean, we could have probably put location, circle area or 1922.
If someone were looking for a specific grave, how would they find that? Huh?
No, I was going to ask you if Virginia Henshaw.
Okay, put Virginia Henshaw. Yep, that's been there a while. If they've been in there a while, they'll be up on the site. Some of the recent ones might not be there. Virginia Henshaw.
If I was going to send somebody over because their uncle so-and-so was buried there, how would I tell them?
Most times they call me and I'll go
Okay.
show them.
All right.
Ronnie Good, he asked me, says,
I'll keep your number on speed dial.
can you find out where, the bush hotter is at? Mr. Bush hotter. I said, yeah, sure, I know where that's at. And the welcomes. So Mr. Bush hotter was, he was a Sioux Indian for the, National, Historical, not the National Historical.
Look at the bottom of that.
Where's Virginia Henshaw?
I'm not seeing Virginia. I see Victoria. I looked up Henshaw.
The other's Levi. That's some of the relatives there too. That's up the top of the circle. And then bring all this other, because all these Henshaws are up in there. Here's Virginia. Valley, Virginia, Henshaw buried. It has the big stone.
Okay, so
They have a big monument. There's a picture. This big monument is up on the upper part of the circle.
She was the founder of the Good and Henshaw chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Revolutionary. Yep. Okay.
And do you know, like in that circle, whereabouts she's buried?
Yes. Yep. Okay. In the circle. Come around the circle all the way around, and you have to make it a little smaller. Yeah. It's right about here where this little tree's at. Over on this side, right here.
Yeah, you'll see a bronze plaque on the monument down there. It's pretty prevalent.
Yeah, it's pretty prevalent as far as it's a big stone, but it's back in here. Yeah, yeah.
So-
So when you go around the circle, just stop and just kind of gaze. You'll see a tree and a bush there. It's over to the left of it.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you,
You're
Curtis.
welcome. Anyway, I was telling you about the bush hoggers, just quick. He was a Sioux Indian, and he married one of the Welcome girls in Hedgesville, and the Welcomes are down in this area, in these trees. And Mr. Bushhart, he speaks English and Sioux, so he was an interpreter for the national down in Washington, D.C. When he got sick, got ill, he was brought back to Hedgesville with his wife living in Hedgesville, buried. Well, the society wanted him down in National. They didn't want anything to do with it. So when he passed away, he was buried in Hedgesville next to his wife. And then the family had windows. They would want to reassume him to take him back. They said, no doings. So they asphalted the whole plot, 18 foot, 6 foot deep. Asphalt. No way that anybody's going to take that body up out of there. That was from Mr. Crow. He was the caretaker at the time. And then Ronnie gave me the pictures of that and how he was the Sioux.
He was an artist.
He was very good.
Sketch artist and stuff from out there.
And I want to give credit to both of these guys because, when they bring these names up to me, they say, hey, can you find this? I said, sure. So I've got everything pretty well written down as, everything that I could read. And then, of course, we had a scout, one of the scouts was doing his Eagle Scout, and he did that find the grave thing, Eagle Scout, at the time. Now we just got to find somebody to keep it up.
So at this point, I want to open up for questions, and any and all of these gentlemen will pipe in. So if they have something to say, I don't think any of them are shy. So once again, because I know at this portion y'all may have other things to do, but there are books by local authors that the ladies at the circ desk will sell you. The Friends of the Library have kind of put this all together and put their stamp on it. So the president of the Friends is here, Jane Padgett. So thanks, Jane, for the Friends of the Library for offering programs like this and keeping me forward and trying to get these programs. If you like this, let us know, because this is the type of thing we'd like to bring to the library. Let us know. So if you have a question, raise your hand and one of these gentlemen will answer it. Or maybe all of them if you're lucky.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the cholera. I heard it was cholera. Now, what year was it?
I'm not sure about that part.
I'm sorry?
I'm not sure.
Influenza flu, 1917 18.
I'm sorry?
The influenza flu in 1917 and 18. Took a lot.
No, the one that he talked about was the railroad
Oh, the
worker.
railroad workers? Yeah, like I say, I don't know what
It'd be,
came
Because,
down.
see-
it'd be back in the 1830s probably when, because it was finished through here by 1842.
Yeah, and the
Right,
railroad.
because cholera was coming through at that point,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
At that rough time.
Mm.
But cholera is a waterborne disease. And Hedgesville
Yeah, I had that.
doesn't, we're not downstream of someplace, okay? So if you had told me there was a cholera outbreak in Martinsburg, I would have said they were drinking dirty river water. But Hedgesville is not on river, okay? And all the water drains away, okay?
True.
So when they told me there was a cholera pit in the cemetery, I was like, I'm not sure why there would be cholera in Martinsburg.
I think Ronnie would know, but wasn't there
In
a
Hedgesville.
small lake or pond down North Mountain where they'd be working to there?
Let me thank the doctor. George McAllister. I have a doctor's journal from
Oh, okay.
1832
That's about right.
to 1850 something, come out of the Speck family auction. That in there talks about him treating railroad workers. I can't recall what he was treating them for. It was like 32, 35.
But
Because
see,
he would treat the railroad workers over, because he got railroad workers treated for whatever, cost them a quarter, whatever he billed them for.
Right.
I can't get it.
But see, the railroad workers would make sense of a cholera breakout because the railroad workers would have been living in a camp with much reduced sanitary protection.
Not so
Whereas-
much camps. I mean, they built houses along the railroad. A lot of those houses was people lived in them for 100 years after. A lot of those homes, but a lot of them were destroyed by the Confederate Army. Right now, you can see the pits, because I did a thing on Allensville, located all the houses. And now all those pits along the railroad were railroad houses for railroad workers to stay in, because they brought, I mean, you see that cut down there, it didn't take for it was hundreds of people was involved in it. So I would think somebody brought it in there from someplace else, or, you know, would have done. Back Creek's always been fairly clean, I wouldn't see it happening there. But you have to have railroad workers that were there, they did a great job, but there were sections of them. You had the Italians, and you had the Irish, there were different, I don't think we had Germans, but the Italian and the Irish was the builders in that area down in North Mountain. And from there, I changed up different people. But I would say probably something that came in. I don't know if anything, like you said, cholera was not something that was prevalent around here. It had to be brought to them.
Right, but it's a waterborne disease.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
And this is just not an area where a waterborne disease would have.
But you did have ponds, supply ponds, all around the places. You know what I'm saying? They dug, because you had the drains from the mountains coming in there. They just opened up the area there and created a pond for water supply.
So it's
And they were there, but it was made. If I find that doctor's ledger, oh my, I can't believe I can't think of his name. I apologize.
But
It's in there.
1818, there was another outbreak of some sort. A lot of people had died on the records.
right.
A lot of people.
1918.
1918.
Yeah, you said
And then
But
in
they were
1918,
buried in cemeteries normally. They weren't
Right.
buried in a plague area.
Yeah, not like, this was like a plague area.
Yeah, that was.
But in 1918, there's some.
And your understanding is that it's not a pit grave where they just threw people in, that they're in rows.
They're
even
in
though,
rows, but they're laying, like
Yes.
beside me.
Yeah, okay.
Not like you see in the wars.
Right.
In other countries.
Just rows of people, okay.
Yes.
The dentist office that's for sale down there, originally, what was that?
Well, it was a lot of things. Store, Poison ran a store back before that. George Craiglow had a store there on the corner. A funeral parlor. A lot of that was involved there. That was probably one of the early commercial sites. Is early. That's probably at least 1830, if not a little earlier. Because when you look at the town, I'm getting off track. But look, when you look at the town Spring Street was the original, I'll say, Route 9. When it was laid out, then they got reset. The houses got up in positions. There's some homes here. There's a few homes date to the 1700s in this town. That was there from the beginning. One there. All right, very few, only a couple. But now we read most about them is the 1830s and 40s, a few 1820s. It's been researched back to 1820. So that was, I'm thinking that log place is in the 30s, 1830s period of time. And it's all built over, it's been modified quite a bit.
Yeah, this road here, Route 9,
Yeah, so under
used to
that
come down
shelf
through the
is,
cemetery.
Really?
It's built out along.
Yeah, if you look at it,
We
look at where the
routed
dentist
over
office is, you'll see the logs exposed there.
Yeah.
There's where, yes, it's a log, and it had been added on to. A lot of these houses, when you look around on Main Street, now the one on the corner is not, it's probably 1870s frame, where the candle shop is now, very diagonally across from that. Next house up, the one, when you look at that broad house there, the right side is log, left side has been brought in by pin frame. Brought in, they made pin frames to the log. Then the back side, I think you moved another house in there, because the back side is log. That was my mother-in-law's house. I didn't know so much about it. All right, so when you look at it, right side was log, left side was pin frame, which is a typical 1870s edition. They framed it with, then put pins in them on that versus logs. And then the back side had all, so I'm thinking they pulled a log house someplace and rolled it into the back of that thing and made another log. I don't see them build a log here, frame here, and in the back you got another log section. It's known, they were known to move log houses away from where they originally were at or to a neighbor. You know, it's hard to believe that horsepower, I mean real horsepower could move those things, you know what I'm saying? But they did that. So you can go up through, and the one on the corner there where the Presbyterian church is, that's a log home on the right, frame on the left, on that. So all these houses, they started out, so I would say they started out, my house, I lived right off South Mary Street, second one on the right. It was laid out with log. Then I go back editions. The second one was the pen edition, and the back was a frame edition on it. Probably 1870s and 1880s, the frame is going back through there. But there's one logs that I bought from my daughter I had to restore. The logs run vertical. Never seen that. It's the only one I know of in the town where the logs, instead of run horizontal, run vertical. And that was different. That was a different style. You have to look at the different, not brick homes, there were some in the town. I think the Episcopal Church is the last one. There was a lot of nice brick homes got destroyed. Right there, one of them was Captain Billy Hedges Hotel. It's a parking lot where the daycare center is now. There was a home there that got destroyed. And it was taken down in the 60s. That's when he put the post office in. That was brick. Wasn't many brick homes actually in the town.
How about the old home when you're going, it's back in the woods in the tree. Huge house, right across from Avies.
Oh, A's
Oh,
lot,
yeah.
that was Daniel Fever's house. Prior to that, that's where Joshua Hedges, who laid off the town. The back section is log. It's a little, it's probably 1750s, 1760s log. You can see it sitting right in the back, it's a little log thing, maybe a little over a story tall. That's the original house there.
That's a huge
Just-
house.
Well, yeah, but
there's
it's
another
remarkable.
one in the back of it.
Yeah, but there's one attached to it, then there's one built on it, then there's an addition. Daniel Fever added the addition to it. And then Tom Speck had it after Civil Tom of the Speck family lived in there, and then John Eckert got it after Speck's. But that place is pretty much abandoned. It's horrible shape. The mold in that thing is just, it's
Yeah, it's a
hideous.
shame just to see things rot away like that.
Well, the guy that owns it, he's John Eckert's son. I ain't gonna mention his name, but there you go.
You have to do.
I have to deal with it. Tried to get him to sell it, and then not. And then at one time it was restorable, and then it's got to. Well, of course, what they restore these days, I guess for the money, because I don't know. They'll restore anything. I'm seeing them take houses that literally
All apart.
fall apart and
Yeah.
put the Band-Aid on it, bring it up, put a roof on it, and then sell it for $200,000. Yes, ma'am.
I have one more question. The minutes book. What year to what year is that?
This one is 1870 to 1893. We have the other minutes book, which has been on our record from 1893 to the 1920s, and then we got some other minutes books along the way. Now everything's on recording. Everything's done, and then you print it off, you put it in a folder.
Have you digitized it?
No. This has only been in the town hall a little over a year. And when I acquired it, after that, I've sat and get used to, I know I was going to turn it in, but I'd sit there and enjoy it a while. It's one of those moments when I acquired it, I had to sit and hold it. And
Yeah, it's gonna be hard to digitize because of the faded.
yeah, now you get through, there's different people's writing is much more, the earlier the writing, the cheaper the ink. And as you get a little older, the ink gets brighter and sharper on that. And once you read it a while, just like anything you learn to read over the wording, you start to understand. It's like I had to read those names. You have to get used to how the guy wrote the names. Now that they didn't write their names in there. The town recorder wrote the names on that piece of paper I read, and how much money they donate each year for the town to exist. So once you understand the person's writing, how they do the H's are horrible. I mean, that could be H and T's. They really roll hard. And once you understand how the writing takes place by that individual, you can start to read the information on that. It's a little bit tough. I can't speak German. I got some German stuff. That was a little tough. I tried to get into that. Even looking up old German, you got to go back. You talk to 1730 stuff for this German. Yes, sir.
Curtis, I don't know whether I missed it. Did you tell when the first meeting house was built, the Episcopal meeting house, and what happened to it? Was it a log and it was torn down, and
Yeah.
or what?
You're exactly right. The first meeting house was the Episcopal Church, right here at number 5. It was a log at the time. Yeah, something happened to it, burned, or it was right there where the fort was at, in that area.
And
Yeah,
what was
and
the
then
year?
it was indestructible or whatever. And then the last minutes on the records of the cemetery was in 1818 when they started to rebuild the brick church for the meeting house and finished in 1819.
But there's no certain date as to when the first meeting house was
No,
there.
I couldn't find that.
other than the records of
Yeah, the
George
Episcopal,
Washington saying he worshiped there.
right. The Episcopal Church has excellent records to take it back.
Yeah, that.
The members of that church have accessibility to those numbers, what you're asking for, the date. They just, I've never really talked with them that much about that, but it is early 1740s,
1754 is the date that it's claimed.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the first Episcopal church in this part of what was then the state of Virginia was Morgan Chapel. near the Morgan cabin.
Okay.
Okay. But that's not a continuously active church. And I say, in my opinion, that this is the oldest continually active church in Episcopal church in the state of West Virginia. Okay. Because if Morgan Chapel is the oldest church, but it's not continuously active, okay. And I can't remember now what year it was, 1730 something, and this one was 1754. Okay. But those records are all Virginia records.
Right.
Because that was when Virginia, and the reason why there's a church right away is because the church was still an established church. So it's like in Dickens, where the church vestry decides who's going to raise the orphans, or the church vestry has to decide who's going to take care of Uncle Frank, who's too demented to take care of himself. Okay. And the church vestry, like when George Washington, they talk about George Washington being a vestryman at Pohick Parish. Well, there was really no great honor in being a vestryman at Pohick Parish. What it meant was that was your sort of your first political job. So you would be a vestryman at the church, okay, and then after some years you might be elected to a better office or something more. Okay. But being a vestryman of the church was like being on the town council, because the church vestry was the people who made the decisions about what to do. And in the early foundation of Virginia, carried over here, because this is Virginia at the time, the church vestry had those responsibilities for the schools, for orphans, for that. So the church claims 1754.
What if you were to recommend one book on the local history? What would that be?
I think I'll speak for that.
Okay.
There are so many. We are blessed in this area of Berkeley County, to have so many historians. Right here today, you've got Steve French. Steve French's books are here. I do have your most recent book in the library system, because it's the McNeil's Rangers book, the one that was published with Kent State University Press. He has that and other books for sale. I can tell you there are differences between the historians, the historical writers in the area. We have every volume of the Berkeley County Historical Society's books here in our reference section at Hedgesville Library. I have worked with Crowell. I lost her first name. Can't remember. Miss Crowell has helped us get all of those intact volumes now. We have as many as I could find volumes on Berkeley County specifically. The historical writers, you have, I'm calling them four different ways maybe to write history. You've got one extreme, Steve French, who takes years and years to write a book. And he has not written a word in that book that he hasn't walked that field or seen the remains of that fence. Steve French walks the history and then writes it. You've got another end of it, which is also valid, which is Bill Moore. And Bill Moore hears stories, and Bill Moore pieces things together and finds out about things and writes them down because they need to be written down. So you've got that end of history as well. Then there's Jim Drogemeyer, who just looks through books and newspapers, and even some of his books are just reprints of the newspaper articles from times gone by. So you've got a smattering of everything. You've got Roger Engel, who writes really good stories about his childhood in Berkeley County. You have so much available to you here. Bob O'Connor, who puts a fictional voice to history, which makes it incredibly readable. So you have, and I probably missed some. Did I miss anybody? But yeah, there are so many. It kind of depends on what you want to read, what you want to read about. But do anybody else have an opinion? I won't let Steve have an opinion.
Can't forget, before all these people were, Don Wood.
Yes.
Was the
bulk of the history.
The bulk of the early history was saved by Don Wood. And I'll tell you what, he had some issues and people, I knew Don pretty well, got to know him, and I started sharing information with him. I finally got my Allensville book done. I don't print, I just collect. I go out and I buy this stuff and buy it. I don't mind sharing. One time I wouldn't share, now I get look myself in the mirror, it's crazy not to share. I don't usually get credit for a lot of I share, because all these people wrote these books over my information. They don't care to share my name, I don't care, but it's preserved. You know what I'm saying? But Don Wood set the stage for everybody else to continue. Don has since passed, and he's not really recognized. He's kind of pushed on by, you know what I'm saying? But you have to understand, Don Wood had a lot of relatives, and most of his books had a relative in it. That was some of the sidebar thing, but it was justly done. It wasn't like he just put it in there. And some of the other families in this county got sidetracked, and I didn't like that. Some of the people who were here during Don Wood's writing frame, and his people he's writing about was here. They never got books written about him. And it's sad. It's sad. Those people deserve their time. So when I tried to get Don to do a book on Hedgesville, just the town, and that's a nightmare in itself. You try to do that, it's just like, oh my gosh, you know what I'm saying? Until you pull your hair out, you're 3 months on one house trying to go to the courthouse, and the courthouse is really not that availability. I mean, try to go in there. I like John Small, great guy, bless his heart. It wasn't a lot of technical support in that courthouse. It's all by hand. Go look at it by hand. You know what I'm saying to you? So with that being said, I'll pass it over. Don Wood set the stage for history being remembered in this county through the Berkeley County Historical Society and all like that. So there have been some books. Don got some support like that, but overall, continuously, there hasn't been anything sent or printed since he's passed or got out of there. It's just stopped.
What I was referring to, I should have been more specific, is for somebody who's new to the area, a general narrative overview, because, you know, for example, the diary is a great resource, but very specific.
Right.
But to learn about the area, and probably be more like Berkeley County, what would be a good starting point for a serious historical view, not a nice like popular history, but one that's well researched?
Probably the old Gardner books, but they're all research. I mean, they were written back in the 30s, right?
38.
And then you may be able to find copies, but you could go to the Martinsburg Library upstairs, and all those old books are there. Evans, History of
Willis Evans, yes, Evans' history. These are the early books, and then there was Hardessy's book out there. And there, what was the book in 1880, Steve? Remember, it had a good part, had some Civil War, had a good diversity of it. I can't pull the name right now. I've had, it ain't Ehlers, maybe Ehlers' History of Berkeley County, 1880s. They have reproduced that book on that. It's either better to read the reprint than the old one on that there, but they at one time they got really scarce. Then they reproduced them. They have them in at the Bell Boyd House in the little gift shop in there. They have a lot of books that's available to purchase in there.
They're open all the time.
And they're open. I would suggest if you're looking at for a certain, even if only a certain part of the county, they will have it in there. I would say they would have representation that can start you where you want to start at this county in there at the Bell Boyd House on that.
I have a question probably for you.
Yep.
My grandparents are buried there, and we would like to have the stone reappointed. You have somebody other than Haymaker? They're like a year and a half behind.
Yeah, most all
There's nobody else to do that.
there's one down in Carneysville, Mr. Tim Walls. He does our digging, and he does also.
My grandson-in-law is the Walls family.
Yeah,
so
okay. You talk to him, he probably can get it done a lot quicker.
Okay. And the other question I had is, my grandfather worked on the railroad, and I have a lot of railroad stuff. that, is there somebody that's a railroad, you know, the B&O Hedgesville railroad person that I'd like to share information? I have my grandfather's, he was the timekeeper. I have
Awesome.
books that are over 100 years old. That he was the timekeeper. I have some pictures. Most of the pictures only have last names, so I'm not really sure who they are. Is there a railroad person, somebody who?
Well, Jeff Hollis used to be, but he's passed.
Right.
And then the roundhouse in there starting to get it together. There's a couple people in
I've
there.
already talked to them 3 times.
And not
they
really
have
got anywhere.
no place for it. They have no place to keep
Oh,
it. They're
alright,
hoping
okay.
they got a grant coming. They're hoping they'll get a safe room, but they don't
See,
really
that's
know.
not an answer
You know, I'm gonna die before that. You know, I mean.
Right. You want to
There
keep it
is,
safe.
that's a tough question.
It is
And just
tough.
like, I'll tell you what, that new museum in the county, the Tri-County Museum, I'm on the board of directors for that museum. And once we get off ground, we're gonna make sure we can keep county history. They told me I had to keep a mouth shut, but I went to the county council and said, learn your spot, where you're at. I said, I will do my best. I said, we don't be doing dumb things. I'm here to preserve history of this county. I mean, and so I'll probably get booted off after 3 years. But anyway, needless to say, in the first 3 years, we're going to make room to save this history of this county. We're going to have a focal point where we can collect the history of this county. Go in there, you're going to have access to it, but you're also looking at least $15 million to get that thing off the ground and get it where it's at. Where's the money going to come from? We have no idea. We have our second meeting next week of that. Our first meeting was get the board established. And so my whole goal is just where's the money going to come from? That's the next question. How much funding we're going to have? Get that building. Right now, that building is ultra modern looking thing. It's pretty nice. It's Art Deco to its time. It's nice.
Beside the courthouse.
Yeah, behind the old
the
Citizens National Bank. And it was in there.
Of
And
course, they got a vault.
they got involved, but there may not be human control because I've stored stuff in there under lock boxes. You get it, it's got mold on it, so it doesn't have humidity control. Yep. So I'm just saying also that is the goal that for that, and if everybody kind of agrees with me, well, at least 3 of us does, to have a place where people can bring this stuff, that it won't be lost on that and can be shared. That's the thing about it, and you get access to it. And that's
Air control.
that's the thing it is. From my 1 vote out of 10, I'll promise you, we are going to work toward that. And that's my dream of being on that board. This county needs that. Because every time the history, that's why I bought so much history. Nobody took care of it. You donated here, whatever, they just got whatever.
That's probably how stuff ended up at Duke.
Yeah,
The
well,
way
yeah, I was
Somebody's
here before,
family.
but I've been going to auctions 40-some years buying. And if it come out, thank God I got an understanding wife. Because I'll tell you one thing, I had spent some money to make sure this stuff stayed here. And it needed to be. And I don't care about that. The way I spent my life is keeping history. And the house is full of mine. It's not pretty. Well, it is pretty, but it's not in a way. But I'm saying, I'm not only just talking about, this county museum is just come out of nowhere. And when I was appointed to that board, I'm just having this thrill of getting that thing going. And we'll just see.
What are they calling themselves?
It's a Tri-County Museum. And see, and also, but there's no Tri-County people on it. It's all Berkeley County. I was hoping to encompass Morgan County and Jefferson County. But Jefferson County's always protected its history.
Yeah.
That you go down Jefferson, you go down there, I call it the silver collection. When that silver-haired lady's sitting there, and then care what they spent. Well, how much did I spend? But I'll never forget that. She spent like $2,200 for that thing. She said, oh, we gotta have a tea. Oh, we just love it. They're gonna have a tea time on this Sunday, meet at my house. We'll have a tea to celebrate what they bought. I mean, they were lovely ladies, but they have passed. You know what I'm saying? I know I'm running out of time, so I apologize. We're running out of time here. But when you see history like that, and now we have a point. Jefferson County's always protected its history. No matter what you do, they protect their land, they protect their history. Berkeley County's always been for sale, and Morgan County's still in the wilderness. Plus, there aren't great people, but they're still in the wilderness. And the funds are really lacking up there. I mean, tell you. Because they sold, I bought some of the stuff from that guy used to be the publisher of the paper up there, had a big collection of stuff, and they let her give it to Hagerstown. Stuff went to Hagerstown. So, you know, what can you say? They kept what they could keep. You know, they don't have so much room. So, I'm sorry.
So, at this point, I think what we'll do, because this is like, I've just been so enthralled up until now. Until now too. But I just want to point out that Ronnie has some things over on the table that are papers, historical papers that mention Hedgesville, just in a beautiful way. So if you want to go look at those, Ronnie has them up there if you want to ask Ronnie a question about the town. And Curtis will be available, I guess, for a few minutes if you want to ask him some questions about the graves. And Steve will sign copies of your book. Also, like I said, Steve he's put foot to ground on all of this history. So if you've got a question, use these resources today. You never know, or you can go get your car fixed, or he will help you with both of those things. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. At this point, I'll turn the video off, and I'm hoping the video will do well. I'm hoping to be able to have it on Facebook. We'll see, but thank you.